Welcome back to Fear Rest. In today's episode, I'm sharing 7 true disturbing stories from the Cumberland Mountains. These are tales of people who ventured into those ancient hollows and ridgelines and found something they were never meant to see. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. The Cumberland Mountains have this way of holding onto the past. I grew up just outside Jellicoe, where the ridges stack up against each other like waves frozen mid-crash, and the hollows between them stay dark even at noon. My Uncle Vernon owned about 40 acres up on Tackett Ridge, land that had been in our family since before anyone bothered with deeds or surveys. He built a hunting cabin up there in the 70s, nothing fancy, just pressure-treated pine and a tin roof that pinged when it rained. I'd been up there maybe twice as a kid, both times with my dad, and I remembered it smelling like kerosene and old coffee. Vernon died in March, stroke quick and clean. At the funeral, my Aunt Diane handed me a key ring with 2 brass keys on it and said the cabin was mine if I wanted to deal with it. She couldn't bring herself to go back up there, she said. Too many memories. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured I'd drive up one weekend, see what condition the place was in, maybe list it, or just let the state take it for taxes. It was mid-April when I finally made the drive. The road up Tackett Ridge isn't really a road past the first mile. It's more like a suggestion carved into red clay, all ruts and exposed limestone. My truck handled it fine until the last quarter mile, where the path narrowed between 2 massive oaks whose roots had buckled everything into a series of humps. I had to edge along with my passenger side mirror folded in, branches scraping the paint. The cabin sat in a small clearing that felt more like a wound in the forest than a deliberate space. Rhododendrons pressed in on 3 sides, their waxy leaves almost black in the shade. The 4th side opened onto a steep drop-off where you could see other ridges layered into the distance, each one hazier than the last. The cabin itself looked smaller than I remembered and older. The tin roof had oxidized to a mottled brown, and the porch sagged on one side like a bad knee. I parked and sat there for a minute with the engine off, window down. It was quiet in that aggressive way mountains get quiet, not peaceful, just absent. No birds, no wind, just the tick of my cooling engine and the faint sound of water running somewhere downhill. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal, obviously. The first key opened the padlock on the door. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd pictured it. A wood stove in the corner, a card table with 2 folding chairs, a cot with a rolled-up sleeping bag, shelves with canned goods that were probably older than me. It smelled like mildew and mouse droppings and something else, something sour I couldn't quite place. I opened the 2 windows to air it out and started taking inventory. Most of it was junk. A broken lantern, mouse traps, all sprung. A stack of hunting magazines from 1983. I'd been there maybe an hour when I noticed the scratching. It was coming from under the floorboards near the wood stove, rhythmic and deliberate. My first thought was raccoons. We had them nest under our porch when I was a kid, and they made a similar sound. I stomped on the floor a couple times, figuring that would scare them off. The scratching stopped. Then, after maybe 30 seconds of silence, it started again. Same spot, same rhythm. I went outside and walked around the cabin, looking for gaps in the foundation. The cabin sat on cinder blocks, and there was maybe 18 inches of clearance underneath. I crouched down and shone my phone's flashlight into the crawl space. Nothing. Just hard-packed dirt and the silhouettes of the floor joists. The scratching had stopped again. Back inside, I told myself it was settling. Old wood contracting, something normal. But my mouth had gone dry, and I realized I was standing very still, listening. The cabin was silent now, too silent. I couldn't even hear that distant water anymore. I decided to check the back room. Vernon had used it for storage, and the door had been closed when I arrived. I turned the knob and pushed it open. The hinges squeaked. The room was dim, the window had been covered with a wool blanket nailed to the frame. I pulled the blanket down and gray afternoon light spilled in. The room was empty except for a wooden chest against the far wall, and on the floor in the dust were marks, not footprints. Marks, long parallel gouges in the dust, like something had dragged itself across the floor from the corner to the chest and back again. 4 lines, evenly spaced, each one starting and stopping at the same points. I knelt down and looked closer. The gouges were deep enough that I could see the bare wood underneath. I opened the chest. It was full of clothes, Vernon's old hunting jackets, a pair of boots, some flannel shirts that still smelled faintly of cigarettes. nothing unusual. But underneath the clothes, at the very bottom, I found a notebook. The kind with a black and white marbled cover that kids use in school. I flipped it open. Vernon's handwriting loose and slanted. Most of it was mundane stuff, dates, weather observations, notes about deer sightings. But toward the back, the entries got stranger. November 14, heard it again last night. Scratching under the floorboards, checked twice, nothing there. November 18, can't sleep. It knows when I'm here. November 23, saw the marks this morning. Same as before, it's trying to get in. December 2, don't come back here. Don't let anyone come back here. The last entry was dated December 9th, 3 months before Vernon died. It was just one sentence, written so hard the pen had torn through the paper in places. It got inside. I heard the scratching again, not from under the floor this time, from inside the walls, moving, circling the room. I could track it by sound. It started near the window, moved along the back wall, then toward the door where I was standing. I stepped back into the main room. The scratching followed me. It was in the wall right next to me now, maybe 3 feet off the floor, and I could hear something else underneath it. A sound like breathing, but wet, thick. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, I glanced back at the storage room. The door was still open. And standing in the doorway, just barely visible in the dim light, was something pale. I didn't see it clearly. I didn't want to see it clearly, but I saw enough. It was tall, taller than the doorframe should have allowed, and it was wrong. The proportions were wrong. The arms hung down past where knees should be, and the fingers were too long, resting against the floorboards. The head was tilted at an angle that made my stomach clench. I ran. I didn't think about it, didn't hesitate. I yanked the door open and sprinted for my truck. Behind me, I heard the cabin door slam shut. Then nothing, just my own footsteps and my breath coming in short gasps. I got in the truck, turned the key. The engine caught, and I reversed so fast I clipped one of the rhododendrons and nearly took out my side mirror. I didn't look back at the cabin. I kept my eyes on the road and didn't slow down until I hit pavement. That night, I burned the notebook in my fireplace at home. I didn't read the rest of it. I don't know what Vernon saw or how long he knew it was there. I put the cabin up for sale the next week, listed it as is, land only. It's sold in 2 months to a developer who plans to bulldoze it. But 3 weeks ago, I found something in my truck, wedged between the driver's seat and the center console. 4 long scratches in the fabric, evenly spaced, deep enough to tear through to the foam underneath. I don't remember them being there before I went up to the cabin. I try not to think about when they appeared. Story 2. My girlfriend Sienna and I decided to hike the Shadowy Trace in late September. We'd been talking about it for months. She'd found this blog post about a section of the trail near Cumberland Falls that supposedly had incredible views and almost no foot traffic. The blogger mentioned an old fire tower you could climb if you didn't mind the rust. And Sienna had this thing about abandoned structures. She was getting her MFA in photography and was always dragging me to decaying barns and shut-down factories. We started the hike around 9 in the morning. The trailhead was just a gravel pullout with a weathered wooden sign, and we didn't see any other cars. The trail itself was well marked at first, white diamonds painted on trees every 50 yards or so. The forest was that early fall mix of green and gold, and the air had a sharpness to it that made everything feel clean. We were in good spirits. Sienna kept stopping to take pictures of mushrooms and moss-covered logs, and I didn't mind the slow pace. Around noon, we reached a fork in the trail. There was supposed to be a marker, according to the blog, but we didn't see one. Sienna pulled out her phone to check the GPS, but we were in one of those dead zones where the map wouldn't load. She thought we should go left. I thought we should go right. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes, debating it before she said, "Let's just try left for a bit. If it feels wrong, we'll double back." It felt wrong almost immediately. The trail narrowed and got rockier, and the white diamonds disappeared. But we'd already been walking for 15 minutes, and Sienna didn't want to admit she'd picked wrong. I should have pushed harder to turn around. I didn't. An hour later, we were in forest I didn't recognize from any of the pictures in the blog. The trees were older here, thicker, and they grew so close together that the canopy blocked most of the sunlight. The trail, if you could still call it that, was just a faint depression in the leaves. We hadn't seen a trail marker in over a mile. Sienna finally stopped and said, "Okay, I think we're lost." Decided to backtrack, but here's the thing about forests, they don't look the same in reverse. Every tree starts to look like every other tree. We walked for what felt like the right amount of time, but we never hit that fork again. Instead, we came out into a clearing we definitely hadn't passed before. In the center of the clearing was a fire tower, not the one from the blog. This one was older, built from some kind of dark metal that had corroded into something between brown and black. The stairs spiraled up 4 levels, and the observation cabin at the top had most of its windows busted out. The whole structure leaned slightly to the left, like it was tired. "This is perfect," Sienna said. She was already pulling out her camera. "I didn't like it. I can't explain why. The tower just felt wrong, the way a room feels wrong when you walk in and realize someone was just talking about you." But Sienna was already heading toward it, framing shots, and I didn't want to sound paranoid. She climbed the stairs first. They groaned under her weight but held. I waited at the bottom, watching her ascend. She disappeared into the observation cabin, and for maybe 30 seconds, I couldn't see her. Then her head popped out of one of the broken windows. "Ryan, you have to see this," she called down. "The view is insane." I started climbing. The stairs swayed with each step, and I kept one hand on the rusted railing, which felt like it might crumble if I gripped it too hard. When I reached the cabin, Sienna was standing at the far window, camera raised. The view was insane. You could see for miles, ridge after ridge of unbroken forest, mountains stacked against the horizon like a painting, but I barely registered it. I was looking at the cabin floor. There was writing on it, dozens of messages scratched into the metal with something sharp. Most of it was just names and dates, people who'd been here before us, but some of the messages were different. "Don't stay after dark. ITWATCHES from the TIES. Heard my name wasn't alone." Sienna noticed me staring. "Creepy, right?" she said, laughing. "People always do this shit in abandoned places." "Sienna, we should go." "In a minute, I just want a few more shots." I looked out the window she'd been using. The clearing below was empty, or at least I thought it was. Then I saw it movement at the tree line, something pale, just barely visible between the trunks. It was there and then it was. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" I pointed, but whatever I'd seen was gone. Sienna took a few more pictures, and we started back down. The stairs felt less stable on the descent, and I moved slowly, testing each step. We were halfway down when we heard it, a voice, distant but clear, calling Sienna's name. "Sienna." She froze. "Is someone else here?" The voice came again, "Sienna." It was coming from the forest. It sounded like me, same tone, same cadence. Sienna looked at me, her face pale. "Ryan, that's your voice." I didn't say anything. We climbed down the rest of the way fast, not bothering to be careful. When we hit the ground, the voice had stopped. The clearing was silent. Sienna grabbed my hand, and we started walking toward the tree line, back the way we thought we'd come. "Sienna." This time it was right behind us. We spun around. Nothing, just the tower leaning in the fading afternoon light. We ran. I don't know if we were going the right direction. We just picked a gap in the trees and went. The forest was darker now, and the undergrowth grabbed at our legs. Sienna kept her hand in mine, and I could feel her shaking. We heard it twice more. Once it called my name in Sienna's voice. Once it called both our names at the same time, overlapping from 2 different directions. We didn't find the trail. We found a creek and followed it downhill, stumbling over rocks and fallen branches, until it led us to a gravel road. We walked that road for 3 miles before a pickup truck stopped and gave us a ride back to the trailhead. Our car was the only one there. It was almost dusk. Neither of us talked much on the drive home. When we got back to Sienna's apartment, she dumped her camera's memory card onto her laptop. She wanted to see the photos from the tower. There were 17 pictures. 16 of them were normal shots of the forest, the cabin, the graffiti on the floor. But the last one, the one she'd taken right before we left, was different. It was a shot of the clearing from the observation cabin window, and standing at the edge of the tree line, just barely in frame, was a figure, pale, tall, with arms that hung too long. Its head was tilted up, looking directly at the camera. Sienna deleted the photo. Then she deleted the whole folder. We haven't talked about it since. Story 3. I got hired to survey a section of land near Middlesbrough in October of last year. The client was a land trust that had just acquired about 200 acres in a trust. and they needed topographical data before they could move forward with their conservation plan. It was standard work. I've been doing boundary surveys and land mapping for almost a decade, but the location was remote enough that I'd need to camp overnight. The access road ended about 3 miles from the survey site, and the terrain was too rough to make multiple day trips practical. I packed my tent, GPS equipment, and enough food for 3 days. The weather forecast was clear. I wasn't worried. I'd camped alone dozens of times. The hike-in was uneventful. The Land Trust had given me a rough map showing the boundary lines, and I spent the first afternoon setting up base camp near a small stream and getting oriented. The forest was old growth, massive tulip poplars and oaks, some of them easily 3 feet in diameter. The undergrowth was thin enough that walking was easy, but thick enough that you couldn't see more than 30 or 40 yards in any direction. I set up my tent in a flat spot about 50 yards from the stream. By the time I had everything squared away, it was getting dark. I made dinner on my camp stove, just instant ramen and a protein bar, and sat by my tent listening to the forest settle. There were owls calling back and forth somewhere uphill. The sound of the stream was constant, almost white noise. Around 9, I crawled into my tent and tried to sleep. I'm usually a good sleeper outdoors, but something felt off. I kept waking up listening. The owls had stopped calling. The forest was quiet except for the stream. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. Not animal footsteps, human footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving through the leaves. They were close, maybe 20 yards from my tent. I lay there not moving, listening. The footsteps circled my camp. They'd get closer, then farther, then closer again. I unzipped my tent and shone my flashlight into the darkness. Nothing, just trees and shadows. The footsteps had stopped. I kept the light on for maybe a minute, sweeping it back and forth. Then I turned it off and got back into my tent. The footsteps started again immediately. This time I didn't get out. I just lay there listening to them circle. They went on for maybe 10 minutes before they stopped. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning I checked the area around my tent. The ground was covered in leaves, so tracks were hard to spot, but I found a few partial impressions. Boot prints, large, maybe size 12 or 13. They circled my campsite exactly the way I'd heard them the night before. I told myself it was another camper, someone passing through. But I hadn't seen anyone on the hike in, and the boot prints didn't lead anywhere. They just circled my tent and stopped. I spent the day working, taking measurements and marking GPS coordinates. I kept my radio on just for the noise. Around 3 in the afternoon, I was setting up a marker near the northern boundary when I noticed something in a tree about 10 yards away. It was a boot, just one, hanging from a branch by its laces. It was old, the leather was cracked and faded, but it looked like it had been placed there deliberately, not just tossed. I walked over and looked up at it. There was no way someone could have thrown it that high. The branch was at least 15 feet up. I didn't touch it. I just marked the location on my GPS and kept working. That night the footsteps came back. Same patterns, slow circles around my tent. But this time there was something else. Tapping. 3 taps on the side of my tent, evenly spaced, near the bottom. Then silence. Then 3 more taps in a different spot. I didn't open the tent. I didn't shine my light. I just sat there with my knife in my hand, listening. The tapping went on for maybe 20 minutes. Then it stopped and the footsteps moved away. In the morning I checked the tent. There were marks on the fabric. Not tears, just indentations, like something had pressed against it from the outside. And in the dirt next to the tent, there was a boot print. Except this one was different from the others I'd seen. This one was pressed so deep into the ground that I could see every detail of the tread, and it was directly under one of the tent sky lines, in a spot where no one could have stood without tripping over the line. I packed up my gear and hiked out that morning. I didn't finish the survey. I called the Land Trust and told them I'd had an equipment malfunction and I'd need to reschedule. They were understanding. 2 weeks later, I was going through my pack and found something in the outer pocket. A piece of leather, about 2 inches square. It looked like it had been cut from a boot. The same cracked, faded leather I'd seen hanging in the tree. I didn't put it there. Story 4. My brother Ethan and I inherited our grandfather's property on Brush Mountain after he passed in August. Neither of us had been up there since we were kids. Grandpa Ed had stopped inviting family after our grandmother died, and neither of us really wanted it. But Ethan had just lost his job in Nashville and needed a place to stay, and the cabin was paid off, so we figured we'd at least check it out. The drive up was longer than I remembered. The mountain roads twisted back on themselves, and every time I thought we were getting close, there'd be another turnoff and another stretch of gravel. When we finally reached the property, it was late afternoon and the light was starting to slant. The cabin was worse than I'd expected. The porch had partially collapsed, and the windows were so dirty you couldn't see through them. But the structure was sound, and Ethan thought he could make it livable with some work. We spent the first hour just clearing out junk, broken furniture, old newspapers, a refrigerator that didn't work. In the back bedroom we found Grandpa Ed's desk. It was an old roll-top, the kind with dozens of little compartments, and most of them were full of papers, tax documents, receipts, letters. Ethan started sorting through it while I worked on boarding up the broken window. "Hey, look at this," Ethan said. He was holding a map, hand-drawn on yellowed paper. It showed the property boundaries, the cabin, and the surrounding forest, but there was something else marked on it, a spot about a quarter-mile north of the cabin, circled in red ink. Next to the circle, in Grandpa Ed's shaky handwriting, were the words, "Don't go here." "What do you think that's about?" Ethan asked. I shrugged. "Probably just a sinkhole or something. You know how these mountains are." We finished cleaning and decided to stay the night. We didn't have sleeping bags, so we just used some old blankets we found in a closet. The cabin didn't have electricity, the wiring was shot, so we used flashlights and a couple of battery-powered lanterns. Around 10, Ethan said he was going to check out the property. I told him it was too dark, but he was restless and wanted to walk. He took one of the lanterns and his phone and headed out. I stayed in the cabin, reading on my phone until the battery got low. He was gone for maybe 30 minutes. When he came back, he looked pale. "I found it," he said. "Found what?" "The spot on the map, the one Grandpa circled." I waited. "There's a hole," Ethan said. "Not a sinkhole like a shaft. Someone dug it. It's got timber supports and everything. Go straight down." "How deep?" "I don't know. I dropped a rock. Didn't hear it hit bottom." We went back the next morning with better lights. The hole was exactly where the map said it would be, in a small clearing surrounded by pines. It was about 4 feet across, reinforced with old wooden beams that looked like they'd been there for decades. The opening was partially covered with rotted planks, but there was a gap big enough to look through. I shone my flashlight down. The beam didn't reach the bottom. The walls were dirt and stone, and I could see the support beams extending down at regular intervals. It looked professional, like a mine shaft. "Why would Grandpa dig this?" Ethan asked. Maybe he didn't. Maybe it was here when he bought the land. We decided to leave it alone. Whatever it wasn't our problem. We went back to the cabin and spent the rest of the day working on repairs. That night I woke up to the sound of something scraping. It was faint, rhythmic like metal on stone. I sat up and listened. It was coming from outside, from the direction of the hole. I got up and looked out the window. The forest was dark, no moon, but I could see the faint glow of Ethan's lantern. He was walking toward the tree line. I pulled on my boots and followed him. By the time I got outside, he was already halfway to the clearing. I called his name, but he didn't turn around. He just kept walking, holding the lantern in front of him. I caught up to him at the clearing. He was standing at the edge of the hole, looking down into it. "Ethan, what are you doing?" He didn't answer, he just stood there staring. I grabbed his shoulder and turned him around. His eyes were open, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me at something in the trees. "Ethan, snap out of it." He blinked and his eyes focused on me. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" "Someone was calling me from down there." I shone my flashlight into the hole. Nothing but darkness, no sound. We went back to the cabin. Ethan didn't remember walking out there. He said he'd been asleep, and then he was just there, standing by the hole. The scraping sound came back the next night. This time we both heard it. It was louder, and it was definitely coming from the hole. We didn't go outside. We just sat in the cabin with the door locked, listening to it scrape and scrape until dawn. In the morning, we packed our stuff and left. We didn't talk about it on the drive down. Ethan moved in with a friend in Knoxville, and I went back to my place in Lexington. We put the property up for sale, but we haven't had any offers. Last month, Ethan called me. He said he'd been having dreams about the hole. In the dreams, he's standing at the edge, and he can hear someone down there calling his name. He said it sounds like Grandpa Ed. I told him it was just dreams, but last week, I found something in my car, a piece of timber, about 6 inches long, old and weathered. It looked like it had come from the support beams in the hole. I don't know how it got there. Story 5. I've been working as a wildlife biologist for the State Forestry Service for about 3 years when they assigned me to the Cumberland Gap Monitoring Project. My job was to set up trail cameras and motion sensors in specific locations to track black bear movement and population. Most of the work was solitary, hiking into remote areas, setting up equipment, coming back a few weeks later to retrieve the data. In November, I was assigned a new section near the Tennessee-Kentucky border. The area was dense forest, minimal human traffic, perfect bear habitat. I had 8 camera locations to set up over 2 days. I'd camp overnight at a designated site and finish the second half of the installations the next morning. The first day went smoothly. I set up 4 cameras without any issues, marked the locations on my GPS, and reached the camping site by late afternoon. It was a small cleared area near a rock outcropping, probably used by hunters during deer season. There was a fire ring and some fallen logs arranged as seating. I set up my tent, filtered some water from a nearby spring, and made dinner as the sun went down. I was eating when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, something like rotting meat and wet dog, but it got stronger as the temperature dropped. I assumed it was a dead animal somewhere nearby. Happens all the time in the woods. I finished eating, hung my food bag from a tree branch 20 yards from camp, and settled in for the night. I woke up around 2 in the morning. The smell was overwhelming now, so thick I could taste it, and there was something moving outside my tent, not around it, just in one spot, maybe 10 feet away. I could hear it breathing, heavy, ragged breaths that didn't sound quite right, too wet, too labored. I lay there, not moving, listening. The breathing continued for maybe 5 minutes. Then it stopped. I heard footsteps, slow, dragging, moving away from my tent toward the food bag. I heard the rope creak as something pulled on it, then silence. I didn't get out of my tent. I didn't even move. I just waited for daylight. When the sun came up, I unzipped my tent and looked around. The food bag was gone. The rope had been cut, not chewed, cut, and the branch it had been hanging from was bent down like something incredibly heavy had pulled on it. The bag itself was about 30 yards away, torn open. My food was scattered everywhere, but none of it had been eaten. It had just been ripped apart and left. And next to my tent, pressed deep into the soft ground, was a print. Not a bear print, not a human print, something in between. 5 toes clawed, but the proportions were wrong. The heel was too long and the toes were splayed in a way that didn't look natural. I packed up my gear immediately. I didn't set up the remaining 4 cameras. I just hiked back to my truck and drove straight to the field office. When my supervisor asked why I hadn't finished, I told him I'd seen evidence of a large predator and didn't feel safe continuing alone. I didn't tell him about the print or the breathing. I figured he'd think I was crazy. 2 weeks later, another biologist was sent to finish the installations. He set up the remaining cameras and retrieved the data from the ones I'd placed. When he got back, he uploaded everything to our shared database. I went through the footage from the camera closest to my campsite. Most of it was uneventful deer, a few raccoons, 1 black bear passing through in daylight. But there was one clip, time-stamped at 2:17 a.m. on the night I'd been there. The camera had been triggered by movement. For the first few seconds, the frame was empty, just trees and undergrowth in the infrared glow. Then something entered from the left side of the frame. It was tall, walking upright, but the gait was wrong. The legs bent backward at the knee, and the arms swung too loosely. The head was lowered, like it was tracking something by scent. It paused in the center of the frame, and for just a moment it turned and looked directly at the camera. The face was pale, almost luminous in the infrared. No visible eyes, just smooth skin where eyes should have been, and a mouth that was too wide, hanging slightly open. Then it moved out of frame, heading in the direction of my campsite. The clip lasted 11 seconds. I watched it 3 times, then deleted it. I told my supervisor the file was corrupted. I don't know if he believed me. I requested a transfer to a different monitoring area. They approved it without question. I haven't been back to that section of the Cumberland Gap, and I don't plan to. But last month, I was reviewing footage from a camera about 5 miles east of my old campsite. Different area, different assignment. Most of the footage was normal, except for one clip, time-stamped at 3:42 a.m. Same figure. Same backward jointed walk. Same eyeless face turning toward the camera. It's moving east, getting closer to populated areas. I don't know what to do about it. Story 6. My cousin Layla asked me to go with her to clear out her ex-boyfriend's stuff from a cabin he'd been renting near Pineville. They'd broken up badly. He'd basically ghosted her and moved out west without taking any of his belongings, and the landlord was threatening to charge her for disposal if she didn't empty the place by the end of the month. She didn't want to go alone, so I agreed to help. Cabin was about 40 minutes outside town, up a rutted dirt road that wound through state forest land. It was small, one bedroom, a combined kitchen and living area, a bathroom that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 50s. Layla had the key, and we let ourselves in around noon on a Saturday. The place was a mess. Clothes everywhere, dirty dishes in the sink, mail piled on the counter. It smelled like stale beer and cigarettes. Layla started in the bedroom while I tackled the kitchen. We figured we could get everything boxed up in a few hours. I was loading trash bags when I noticed the basement door. It was in the hallway, just a plain wooden door with a padlock on it. I asked Layla about it, and she said she didn't know. Her ex had never mentioned a basement. We tried the key ring the landlord had given her. One of the keys fit the padlock. We looked at each other, shrugged, and opened the door. There was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air that came up was cold and damp, with that earthy smell basements have. I used my phone's flashlight and started down. Layla followed. The basement was unfinished, just a dirt floor and stone walls. There was no light fixture, no wiring that I could see. It was almost empty except for a wooden chair in the center of the room and a metal toolbox against one wall. The chair faced the stairs. Sitting on it was a doll, not a kid's doll, something handmade, stitched from burlap and stuffed with what looked like dried grass. It had buttons for eyes and a stitched line for a mouth. Its arms and legs were too long, hanging down past the edge of the chair. "What the hell is that?" Layla whispered. I walked over to the toolbox and opened it. Inside were jars, maybe a dozen of them, all different sizes, all filled with dark liquid. And floating in each jar was something pale, pieces of something I realized. I didn't look too closely. I closed the box. "We need to leave," I said. "What's in there?" "I don't know, let's go." We went back upstairs, locked the basement door, and finished packing as quickly as we could. We didn't talk about what we'd seen, we just wanted to get out of there. We were loading the last box into Layla's car when we heard it, a thump from inside the cabin. Then another, rhythmic, coming from below. "Is someone in the basement?" Layla asked. I didn't answer. I just got in the car. She did the same. We drove away and I watched the cabin in the side mirror until it disappeared behind the trees. 2 days later, Layla called me. She said the landlord had contacted her. The cabin had been broken into. The front door was open and the place was trashed, but nothing was stolen. And the basement door was wide open, the padlock on the floor. The chair was still there. The doll was gone. Story 7. I don't camp often anymore, but back in my 20s, I used to spend entire weeks in the backcountry. The Cumberland Mountains were my favorite, remote enough that you could go days without seeing another person, but not so rugged that you needed technical gear. In September of 2019, I decided to do one last solo trip before the weather turned. I picked a section of trail near Big South Fork, an area I'd hiked before but never camped in. The plan was simple, 3 days, 2 nights, minimal gear. I parked at the trailhead on a Thursday morning and started hiking. The weather was perfect, mid-60s, clear skies, just enough breeze to keep the bugs down. I made good time and reached my planned campsite by mid-afternoon. The site was on a flat shelf of land overlooking a creek, perfect spot. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and spent the evening just sitting by the water, watching the light fade. It was one of those trips where everything goes right, until it didn't. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone calling my name, not shouting it, just saying it calmly, like they were trying to get my attention. "Jordan." I sat up. The voice was coming from outside my tent, maybe 20 feet away. It sounded like my mom. Same tone, same inflection, but my mom lived in Ohio, and I sure as hell hadn't told her where I was camping. "Jordan." This time it was closer, right outside the tent. I didn't move, I barely breathed. The voice called my name 3 more times, each time from a different direction. Once from the left, once from behind the tent, once from the creek. Then it stopped. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there with my knife in my hand, waiting for dawn. In the morning, I checked around the campsite. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. I told myself it had been a dream or some kind of acoustic trick. Sound does weird things in the mountains. I spent the day hiking, trying to shake off the unease. By evening, I was feeling better. I made dinner, watched the sunset, and crawled into my tent around 9. The voice came back at midnight. This time it wasn't just my name, it was a conversation. "Jordan, are you awake?" My mom's voice. Then my dad's voice. "He's not answering, maybe he's asleep." My mom again. "Jordan, please come out. We need to talk to you." I knew it wasn't them. I knew it with absolute certainty. But hearing their voices, so clear and familiar, made something twist in my chest. I wanted to answer. I had to physically stop myself from unzipping the tent. The voices went on for maybe 10 minutes. They talked about me like I wasn't there. They wondered where I was. They said they were worried. Then my mom said something that made my blood go cold. "If he doesn't come out, we'll have to come in." The tent shook. Something grabbed the fabric near the door and pulled. I heard the zipper start to open. I lunged forward and grabbed it, held it shut. The pulling stopped. Silence, then laughter, not my parents' laughter, something else. High-pitched and wrong, like an animal trying to imitate a human sound. I didn't leave my tent. I sat there all night, holding the zipper closed, listening to that laughter circle my camp. It didn't stop until the sun came up. I packed my gear at first light and hiked out. I didn't stop until I reached my car. The drive home was a blur. I haven't been back to the Cumberland Mountains since. I probably never will. But sometimes, late at night, I hear my name being called. It's faint, like it's coming from another room. I check every time, but no one's ever there. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most, and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there.